Fly to Geneva, the 4-star general told me at my father's grave. Give them your father's name, they'll understand. I remember the wind more than anything else. It moved across Arlington like it owned the place, bending the small American flags planted beside the white stones. There were only 2 other people within sight, a groundskeeper in the distance, and the general standing in front of me, his eyes steady, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. My father had been buried 30 minutes earlier. No long line of mourners, no folded program with a list of achievements, no slideshow of medals, just me, a flag, and a name carved into marble. My dad was a retired Navy SEAL. No medals on the wall, no stories. He lived quiet, died the same way. He never liked attention. Growing up in Norfolk, Virginia, I didn't even know what he'd done until I was almost 20. Other kids talked about their father's promotions or retirement parties. Mine fixed the fence, paid his bills early, and drank his coffee at exactly 6 every morning. He worked part-time at a marine supply store after he retired. Said he liked the smell of rope and salt. He never once told me about combat. When he passed, it was sudden. Heart attack, in his kitchen. A neighbor found him when he didn't answer the door for 2 days. The medical examiner called me at work. I remember staring at my computer screen and not understanding the words. He had no visible wealth, no second property, no secretive lifestyle. His will was simple and handwritten, filed properly with a local attorney. The house went to me. Everything else was minimal. My older brother Daniel called before I'd even finished arranging the funeral. Guess that's it, huh, he said. Dad never had much. There was something in his tone that bothered me, not grief, assessment. At Arlington, when the chaplain finished speaking and the rifle volley echoed, I felt something settle inside me. Final, clean. I was ready to leave when I saw the general walking toward me. He didn't introduce himself with rank. I only noticed the 4 stars when the light caught his shoulder. He looked to be in his late 60s, composed, unhurried. He shook my hand. I served with your father, he said. That surprised me. My father had never mentioned serving alongside anyone who reached that level. The general glanced at the headstone, then back at me. Fly to Geneva, he said. Give them your father's name. They'll understand. No explanation, no dramatic pause. Then he handed me a simple white card. No insignia, just a phone number with a Swiss country code and a last name written neatly in ink. Before I could ask a single question, he nodded once and walked away. I stood there holding that card long after he disappeared among the rows of marble. I didn't tell Daniel about it. That evening I went back to my father's house. The place still smelled faintly of Old Spice and motor oil. His boots were by the door. His coffee mug sat clean in the rack. Nothing about his life suggested international banking. I opened drawers I had never opened before. Old tax returns, insurance documents, receipts from hardware stores, everything ordinary, everything small. But then I found his passport. It was in the back of his closet, tucked inside a weathered shoebox. The pages were thick with stamps, Switzerland, France, Germany, dates going back almost 20 years, trips I never knew he took. I sat on the edge of his bed and tried to make sense of it. Daniel called again that night. So what's the plan, he asked. You selling the house? It's not even been a day, I said. I'm just saying, if there's anything left, we should divide it clean. There it was again, clean, efficient, transactional. He didn't leave much, I told him. Daniel exhaled sharply. Yeah, that sounds like him. After I hung up, I looked at the Swiss phone number again. I wasn't someone who chased mystery. I worked as a compliance officer for a shipping company. I lived a careful life. But something about the way the general had spoken didn't feel dramatic. It felt procedural, like he was passing along instructions that had been waiting. I called the number the next morning. A woman answered in precise English. I gave her my father's name. There was a pause, a longer one this time. Yes, she said, we have been expecting you. My heart didn't race, it slowed. She asked when I could travel. I told her I would need time. That is understandable, she said. When you arrive, please bring identification and a copy of the death certificate. No mention of money, no mention of accounts. Just calm expectation. After I hung up, I walked through the house again. I noticed details I'd ignored before. A locked file cabinet in the garage. A small safe in the hall closet I had never seen opened. My father had lived modestly, quietly, but not carelessly. That afternoon, Daniel texted, "Make sure you don't do anything stupid with the estate." I stared at that message for a long time. For years, Daniel had struggled financially, credit cards, business ideas that never quite worked. Dad had helped him more than once, quietly, without judgment. I suddenly wondered if Dad had been preparing for something all along. That night, I booked a ticket to Geneva. I didn't tell anyone. As the confirmation email appeared in my inbox, I realized something important. My father had not died with nothing. He had died with instructions. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was stepping into a part of him he had never shown anyone. Not even me. I didn't tell Daniel about the flight. I told him I was meeting with Dad's attorney to wrap up paperwork. That was enough to keep him calm for a few days. He lived 2 counties over near Richmond and rarely drove down unless he thought there was something to gain. The morning before I left for Geneva, he showed up anyway. He didn't knock the way he used to. He tapped twice and let himself in like the house already belonged to him. He looked around the living room as if he were taking inventory. "Place looks smaller," he said. "It's the same size I told him." He ran a hand across the mantel where there had never been medals. "Hard to believe this is it." "That's what you keep saying." He turned toward me. "I just don't want you making decisions without me." "It was Dad's will," I said, "not mine." He laughed lightly. "Yeah, and Dad always did things his own way." There was resentment in his voice, not loud, just settled there like something old and worn in. We sat at the kitchen table where Dad had done his crossword puzzles every Sunday. Daniel leaned back in the chair. "You know, he loaned me money," he said. "I know. More than once." "I know that too." Daniel rubbed his face. He said it wasn't a big deal, said I'd figure things out. "You didn't," I said quietly. "That landed harder than I meant it to." He stiffened. "Easy for you to judge," he said. "You always played it safe." Maybe I had. I worked a steady job. I paid my mortgage on time. I didn't chase investments or open restaurants or buy boats I couldn't afford. Daniel did all of that. "Dad loved you," I said. "He respected you," Daniel replied. "There's a difference." The comment stayed with me long after he left. That afternoon, I packed one small suitcase. I tucked Dad's passport into my carry-on along with the death certificate and my own identification. I didn't know what I would be walking into, but something told me it wasn't going to be a vault full of gold bars. Dad didn't live like that. The flight was long and quiet. I had time to think about the years we barely spoke after Mom died. Daniel drifted away first. I stayed. I visited every Sunday. I brought groceries. I listened to him talk about fishing and weather and nothing at all. He never once mentioned Switzerland. When I landed in Geneva, it didn't feel glamorous. It felt clean, efficient, quiet in its own way. The cab driver didn't speak much English. The streets were narrow and tidy. The lake looked gray under the winter sky. The bank building was understated. No flashy signs, just stone and glass. Inside, everything moved at a careful pace. I gave my father's name at the reception desk. The woman behind it didn't react, but she made a call. Within minutes, a man in a dark suit approached me. "Miss Turner," he asked. "Yes?" "Please come with me." We walked down a corridor that smelled faintly of polished wood. No marble statues, no dramatic security gates, just doors and quiet. He led me into a private office and closed the door gently. "I am very sorry for your loss," he said. "Your father was a disciplined man." That word caught my attention. Disciplined. "You knew him?" I asked. In a professional sense, he replied. He opened a folder. Inside were documents neatly arranged. My father's signature appeared on several pages dated over 2 decades ago. "He established a trust here in 2002, the man explained. It has been maintained with consistent contributions." I stared at the numbers. They were not billionaire numbers, but they were substantial. Enough to change a life. Enough to protect several families. "This can't be right," I said. "It is correct," he assured me. "What was it for?" The banker folded his hands. "Your father designated the trust to support a specific group of individuals. Former service members, certain medical needs, family assistance in case of hardship." I sat back slowly. He never said anything. He would not have, the banker said. Confidentiality was important to him. "And me?" I asked. "You are the successor trustee." The room felt smaller. "He structured it so that you would assume oversight upon his passing. The funds cannot be dissolved without your approval. I thought of Daniel immediately, his debts, his expectations. Are there other beneficiaries? I asked. Several, he said. We have contact information. They are unaware of your father's passing. The banker slid another envelope toward me. There is also a letter, he said, written in your father's hand. It was to be given only after his death. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. Before I opened it, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I let it ring once before answering. So he asked immediately, what did the lawyer say? I'm still reviewing paperwork, I said. Is there anything he pressed? I looked at the numbers again. Yes, I said slowly, there's something. There was a long pause on his end. How much, he asked. I didn't answer. Because in that moment I understood something clearly. The trust wasn't a secret fortune waiting to be divided. It was a responsibility. And my brother had no idea what our father had really been building all these years. I didn't tell Daniel the amount. I told him I needed time to understand what I was looking at. That part was true. The numbers were real, but they weren't the whole story. What mattered more was the structure. My father hadn't simply stored money in Switzerland. He had built something deliberate. After I hung up with Daniel, I opened the envelope the banker had given me. The paper inside was thick and familiar. My father's handwriting hadn't changed since I was a child. Block letters, straight lines, no flourish. If you're reading this, then I didn't get a chance to explain it in person. That line alone made my throat tighten. I did not hide this from you out of mistrust. I hid it because money changes how people listen. He went on to explain that after he retired, he stayed in touch with a small circle of men he had served with. Not reunions, not social calls, quiet check-ins. Over time, some of those men had faced medical issues, injuries that never fully healed, cancers tied to deployments, financial strain after government benefits ran thin. He didn't complain about it. He didn't ask for recognition. He simply started setting money aside. You don't advertise help, he wrote. You just provide it. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. The banker returned with another folder. Inside were summaries carefully anonymized of the families who had received support over the years. Tuition for a daughter after her father's stroke. Mortgage assistance for a widow. Medical transport for a man who needed specialized treatment. My father had never been flashy, but he had been steady. This trust is currently valued at just over $12 million, the banker said. The number didn't register at first. 12 million. It wasn't celebrity wealth, but it was far more than I had imagined. My father had lived in a modest 3-bedroom house. He drove a 12-year-old truck. He clipped coupons. How, I asked. Investments, the banker said. Disciplined ones. Long-term. Conservative growth. He was consistent. That word again? He also declined several opportunities to withdraw funds for personal use, the banker added. I let that sink in. Daniel had always believed Dad had nothing, that he was tight, that he withheld. But he hadn't withheld, he had directed. What happens now, I asked. You assume full oversight, the banker replied. Disbursements continue unless you choose otherwise. And if I choose to liquidate? It is within your legal authority, he said evenly. Though there would be tax implications. I thought of Daniel's voice on the phone. How much? The temptation to simplify everything to dissolve the trust, divide the money and move on crossed my mind. It would be easy. It would quiet the noise. But it would erase what my father had built. My brother will contest this, I said. The banker nodded slightly. The trust is valid under both Swiss and U.S. law. However, family disputes are not uncommon. He handed me a packet containing legal documentation and contact information for an American firm that specialized in international estate matters. This will not be dramatic, he said. It will be procedural. That reassured me. When I stepped back out into the Geneva air, the lake looked the same as it had earlier, gray, steady, and different. I walked slowly along the water before returning to my hotel. I didn't feel rich. I felt responsible. That evening, Daniel called again. Don't dodge me, he said when I answered. What did he leave? Dad created a trust, I said. For who? For veterans and their families. Silence. And us, he asked. I'm the trustee. That's not what I asked. There's money, I said carefully, but it's not sitting in a checking account waiting to be split. How much, he asked again. 12 million, I said. He inhaled sharply. Jesus, he muttered, and he never helped me out properly. He did help you, I said, more than once. That's different, Daniel snapped. That was loans. This is inheritance. It's not that simple. It is that simple, he insisted. You're sitting on $12 million that should be divided. It's not mine to divide, I said. It's structured. He grew quiet. I'll talk to a lawyer, he said finally. I figured you would. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and reread my father's letter. Money tests people. That line wasn't written, but I could hear him saying it. For years, Daniel believed Dad favored me. Maybe in some ways he did. Not because I was better, but because I listened. Now I was in a position that would test me too. I could dissolve the trust and walk away wealthy. Or I could continue what my father had started and risk becoming the villain in my own family. I slept lightly that night. When I boarded the plane back to Virginia the next morning, I carried more than documents in my briefcase. I carried a decision that would define the rest of my life. And I knew Daniel wasn't going to accept it quietly. When I landed back in Virginia, the sky looked wider than I remembered. Familiar, honest. Nothing about it hinted that I was carrying documents tying my name to $12 million in Switzerland. I drove straight from the airport to my father's house. Daniel's truck was already in the driveway. He was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, a legal pad in front of him, like he was preparing for a meeting. You move fast, I said. I called an attorney, he replied. Probate specialist, Richmond. Of course he did. He didn't ask how my flight was. He didn't ask about Geneva. He went straight to the point. You're not keeping that from me, he said. I'm not keeping anything, I answered. But you don't understand what it is. Then explain it. I placed the folder on the table and opened it. I didn't hand it to him. I walked him through it the way the banker had walked me through it. It's a trust, I said. Established in 2002. It supports specific veterans and their families, medical assistance, housing support, long-term care. Daniel frowned. That's charity. It's responsibility, I said. And you control it. Yes. And I get what... I looked at him carefully. You were not named as a beneficiary. The words sat between us. His jaw tightened. So he cut me out. He made a decision. Because I struggled, Daniel shot back. Because I wasn't perfect. He wrote a clause, I said quietly, about financial stability. He didn't want the trust dissolved. That's not what I asked. Daniel slammed his hand lightly on the table. Not violent, just frustrated. What did he say about me, he demanded. I hesitated. Daniel, I said, he said he had already given you what he could. Daniel laughed once short and sharp. So that's it, I get nothing. You got help, I said, multiple times, quietly. That was different. Yes, I said, it was. He stood up and paced the kitchen. You always thought you were better, he said. I never thought that. You stayed close to him. You knew how to talk to him. I didn't. That's not about money, I said. It is now. He stopped pacing. My lawyer says international trusts can be challenged, he said. Especially if assets weren't disclosed properly in the will. They were disclosed, I said. The existence of the trust was referenced. The contents weren't itemized. That's standard. You sound like you've already prepared your defense. I prepared for responsibility, I replied. That word again. Responsibility. Daniel's eyes narrowed. So, what are you going to do? He asked. Keep running his little secret foundation while I'm drowning. I didn't say that. Then what? That was the part I hadn't said out loud yet. There was a secondary clause in the trust. If I chose, I could allocate a defined percentage annually for direct family stabilization, provided it was structured, documented, and conditional. Dad had thought of everything. He hadn't cut Daniel off. He had set boundaries. I can create a structured support plan, I said carefully. Debt counseling, financial oversight, controlled distributions tied to accountability. Daniel stared at me like I had insulted him. You want to manage me? I want to protect what Dad built. You think I'll agree to that? No, I said honestly, I think you'll fight it. And you're okay with that? No, I said, but I'm not dissolving the trust. The room went quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and stopped. Daniel picked up his jacket. You're choosing strangers over your own brother, he said. I'm choosing what Dad intended. He looked at me for a long moment. There was anger there, but underneath it something else. Hurt, old hurt. "You always wanted his approval," he said. "No," I answered. "I wanted his trust." Daniel left without slamming the door. That night I sat alone at the kitchen table and reread the trust documents. Dad hadn't written them in emotional language. Everything was measured, structured, predictable. He had known this moment would come. He had known money would test us. The next morning I received notice from Daniel's attorney, a formal request for full disclosure of the trust, citing potential undue influence and lack of transparency. It had begun. Not a dramatic courtroom battle, not shouting, just paperwork. Procedure. I hired an older attorney in Norfolk named Thomas Reeves, gray hair, Navy veteran, calm voice. He reviewed everything carefully. "This is solid," he said. "Your father was thorough." "He expected this," I replied. Thomas nodded. "Families don't fall apart over money," he said. "Money just reveals what was already there." I thought about that long after I left his office. Daniel wasn't evil. He wasn't greedy in a cartoon sense. He was resentful. And resentment mixed with $12 million is a dangerous thing. I drove back to Dad's house that evening and stood in the living room where there had never been medals on the wall. He had lived quietly. Now his quiet life was making noise. And I was the one who had to decide how loud it would get. Daniel filed within 3 weeks. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting on the courthouse steps. Just a formal petition in the Circuit Court of Norfolk challenging the validity of the trust and questioning whether Dad had properly disclosed his foreign holdings. Undue influence, lack of transparency, failure to provide equal distribution to heirs. Legal language has a way of turning family into categories. Thomas Reeves called me the morning the papers were served. "This is standard," he said calmly. "He's testing the structure." "Will it hold?" I asked. "Yes," Thomas said. "If what you showed me is complete, it will hold." That word again. Hold. The first hearing was procedural. We sat in a plain courtroom with beige walls and fluorescent lights. No television cameras, no reporters. Just a judge, 2 attorneys, a clerk, and a handful of people waiting for their own cases to be called. Daniel sat at the opposite table. He didn't look at me at first. He looked tired. When our case was called, the judge adjusted her glasses and reviewed the filing. Daniel's attorney argued that the Swiss trust had been structured in a way that unfairly limited Daniel's access to what should have been marital property inheritance under Virginia law. Thomas responded steadily. "The trust predates any relevant claim by 20 years," he said. "It was legally established, properly funded, and referenced in the decedent's will. There is no evidence of undue influence." I listened to the words without reacting. This wasn't a fight. It was an audit. The judge requested additional documentation and scheduled a follow-up hearing. Outside the courtroom, Daniel finally spoke to me directly. "You could end this today," he said. How, I asked. "Split it." "It's not mine to split." "It's $12 million, he said. "Nobody would know." "That's not true," I replied. "Dad would know." Daniel shook his head. "You're making him into something bigger than he was." "No," I said quietly. "I'm discovering who he was." The next hearing brought more documentation. Swiss certification, investment records, statements of disbursement to beneficiaries, everything clean, everything consistent. Thomas handled it with the patience of someone who had seen families fracture before. On the third appearance, something unexpected happened. The 4-star general appeared. He didn't make an entrance. He walked in quietly and took a seat behind us until Thomas called him as a witness. He testified calmly, no theatrics. "I served with Mr. Turner," he said. "He was a man of discipline and integrity. I was aware of his intention to establish long-term support for specific service members. Daniel's attorney tried to imply that the general had influenced my father in creating the trust. The general didn't raise his voice. No one influenced him, he said. If anything, he influenced others." There was a subtle shift in the room after that. Authority, when it's steady, carries weight. After the testimony, the judge recessed briefly. When she returned, her ruling was measured. "The trust is valid," she said. "It predates any alleged conflict. There is no evidence of undue influence. The petitioner's claim is dismissed." Just like that. No dramatic gavel slam, no applause. Dismissed. Outside the courthouse, Daniel didn't speak to me at first. He stood beside his truck staring at the pavement. You really weren't going to bend, he said finally. No. You'd rather let me lose publicly. I didn't make you file, I said. He looked up at me then, and for the first time the anger seemed thinner. He never trusted me, he said quietly. That's not what this was about. It feels like it. I didn't argue. Because in some ways he was right. Dad had trusted me with oversight. That didn't mean he didn't love Daniel, but trust and love are not always distributed the same way. I'm not your enemy, I said. Daniel gave a tired half smile. Feels like you are. He drove off before I could respond. That night, I returned to the house and opened the safe in the hallway closet. I had found the combination earlier in one of Dad's notebooks. Inside were only 3 things. A folded American flag from a ceremony years ago, a photograph of Dad with 3 other men, none wearing uniforms, and a small note in his handwriting. Steady wins. That was all. No speeches, no instructions about revenge. Just steady. Daniel had lost the case. Publicly, yes. But more than that, he had lost the illusion that Dad's quiet life meant small. The trust remained intact. The beneficiaries would continue receiving support, and I now had full authority to shape how the family portion of it would be handled. Winning in court felt less satisfying than I expected. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility confirmed. But responsibility isn't loud. It's steady. Winning in court didn't fix anything. It only settled the paperwork. For a week after the ruling, Daniel didn't call. No texts, no emails, just silence. I continued working with the Swiss office to ensure the next round of disbursements went out on schedule. Medical bills, tuition payments, mortgage assistance. Life moved forward the way it always does, but something in me kept returning to one line in Dad's letter. You don't advertise help, you just provide it. Daniel wasn't one of the named beneficiaries, but he wasn't excluded from humanity either. I drove to Richmond on a Thursday afternoon. His townhouse looked the same as always, grass slightly too long, porch light burned out. His truck was in the driveway. He opened the door slowly when I knocked. I figured you'd come eventually, he said. Can I come in? He stepped aside. The place smelled like coffee and old carpet. Bills were stacked on the kitchen counter. I didn't comment on them. We sat at his small dining table. I'm not here to argue, I said. Then why are you here? Because this isn't about winning. He gave a faint, skeptical smile. Feels like it was. I'm not dissolving the trust, I said. That part is final. I figured. But Dad built a provision for family stabilization. Structured, controlled, accountable. Daniel leaned back in his chair. So what does that mean for me? It means I can allocate funds annually for you if you agree to financial counseling and oversight. His jaw tightened. You want to monitor my spending. I want to prevent the cycle. I'm not a child. No, I said, you're my brother. The room went quiet. I reviewed Dad's records, I continued. He paid off your credit cards twice, covered your business loan once, helped with the down payment on this place. Daniel looked away. He never made me feel small about it, he said. I'm not trying to. Then why the conditions? Because he believed in boundaries, I said. So do I. Daniel stared at the table. You think I can't manage money, he said. I think you haven't yet. It wasn't cruel, it was factual. He exhaled slowly. I wanted him to be proud of me, he said quietly. I know. He never said it. He didn't say it to me either, I said. He showed it. Daniel's eyes were glassy now, though he didn't cry. You got the trust, he said. That says enough. No, I said gently. It says he trusted me to protect it. That's different. We sat there for a long moment. I'm offering you this, I said. Structured debt repayment. A financial advisor paid for by the trust. A capped annual distribution tied to progress. No lump sum, no blank check. And if I say no, then nothing changes. He nodded slowly. You'd really walk away. I already did once, I said, in court. That wasn't revenge, it was reality. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table. I don't want to be the guy who sued his sister over money, he said. Then don't be. He gave a tired laugh. You always talk like Dad. I learned from him. We spent the next hour reviewing numbers. What he owed. What it would take to stabilize his situation over 5 years instead of 1. It wasn't glamorous, it was spreadsheets and discipline. When I stood to leave, Daniel walked me to the door. "You really went to Switzerland," he said. "Yes." "And he really built all that?" "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "I thought he was small," he admitted. He wasn't. Neither of us said more. As I drove back to Norfolk, I realized something important. Revenge isn't always about crushing someone. Sometimes it's about refusing to let resentment dictate the outcome. Daniel had tried to force the trust open. Instead, he was now stepping into structure. Not because I humiliated him, but because I didn't. Dad had lived quietly. I was beginning to understand why. A year after the court dismissed Daniel's claim, we stood together at Arlington. Not because the trust required it, not because anyone asked us to. Because it felt right. The headstone looked the same as it had the day the general told me to fly to Geneva. Clean, simple, no extra inscription, just his name, rank, and dates. Dad never liked decoration. Daniel had aged in 12 months. Not physically, but in posture. The sharp edge in him had softened. He had completed his first year of financial counseling, paid down nearly half his debt, sold the second truck he didn't need, closed the credit lines that used to feel like lifelines. He hadn't become perfect. He had become steady. The trust continued exactly as Dad designed it. Medical payments went out quarterly. 2 children of former teammates started college that fall. A widow in Texas kept her home because her mortgage was quietly brought current. No press releases, no foundation galas. Just steady. Daniel glanced at the headstone. "I used to think he was holding out on us," he said. "He was holding something," I replied, "just not what we thought." He nodded. "Do you ever wish you'd just split it?" he asked. "No." He looked at me carefully. "Even when I sued you. Especially then." That earned a small smile. We stood there a while longer. The wind moved the flags the same way it had on the day of the funeral. Some things don't change. They don't need to. Before we left, Daniel cleared his throat. "I was wrong," he said, "about him, about you." "I know," I answered. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. On the drive back, I thought about the first time I opened Dad's letter in that quiet office in Geneva. Money changes how people listen. He was right. For a few months, Daniel only heard numbers. So did I, if I'm honest. 12 million can make your pulse quicken. But over time, the number faded. What remained was structure, responsibility, legacy. Dad hadn't left me wealth to enjoy. He left me a standard to maintain. There were nights over the past year when I felt overwhelmed. The paperwork, the oversight, the careful decisions about who qualified for assistance and how much to release. But every time I felt tempted to simplify it, sell assets, reduce complexity, turn it into something easier, I thought about the way he lived. No medals on the wall. No stories. Just steady. Daniel now meets with his advisor once a month. He sends me updates voluntarily. Not because I demand them, because he chooses to. We still disagree sometimes, we still have history, but we no longer have resentment sitting at the center of the table. The trust will continue long after I'm gone. It's structured that way. The Swiss office has succession protocols, legal safeguards, layers of review. Dad thought in decades, not months. That's something I didn't understand when I was younger. I used to think loud success mattered more. Bigger houses, faster promotions, public recognition. Now I see it differently. Steady wins. If you've ever sat at a kitchen table after a funeral and wondered what someone really left behind, you know what I mean. It's rarely just money. It's patterns. It's discipline. It's the example you choose to follow or reject. My father was a retired Navy SEAL. No medals on the wall, no stories. He lived quiet, died the same way. But he didn't leave quietly. He left instructions. And he trusted me to follow them. If this story made you think about someone in your own life, someone who lived steady instead of loud, take a moment today to honor that. Call them if you can. Forgive them if you need to. Learn from them while there's still time. And if you believe strength doesn't have to shout to matter, I hope you'll stay with this channel. Share your thoughts below. Tell me what steady has meant in your life. Because sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to protect.